Having painted these doors an architrave, I wanted to brighten up the hinges, which were previously a very tarnished brass. How did I go about it? And why am I disappointed with the outcome? Hi, and welcome back to the garage. This time we're looking to refresh these tarnished brass Parliament hinges. We're aiming to end up with something that looks a lot fresher, newer, more modern, not quite chrome but near enough. And to do that we're going to be using Jenolite Chrome paint. Before we make a start, I'll just mention the two cans of paint that I've got. Obviously we've got the Jenolite Chrome paint, but before that we'll be using some grey surface primer. Now this isn't etch primer because etch primer is not suitable for brass. This is just a general purpose primer that I picked up at my local hardware store. Now it would be great if we could just get our can of chrome paint and just quickly spray all the hinges and the job would be done. But we're not going to end up with a very good finish if we do that. Instead, we need to go through a number of steps. So starting off with the hinge as it's been taken off the door, you can see it's quite tarnished, but it's not actually that dirty. Hasn't had any oil on it, there's no real grease. So in this particular case, I didn't find any need, given the next step we'll do, to actually clean it. But depending on the state of your hinges, you might need to give them a good wash in some water with detergent, or even maybe some degreaser or some solvent, depending on what's there. Having said all that, and assuming that the hinge is sufficiently clean, then the next step is to rub the surface down to get something like that. And if I put the two together, you can see the difference. The surface is much brighter. You can see very fine scratch marks almost where the emery paper has rubbed off the surface. What we're aiming for is something that the paint will key to. We don't want to put large gouges in the material, and especially brass being slightly softer, we need to be careful of that. So in this case, I've used some 800 grit emery paper. It does make the rubbing down task a little bit harder because you've got to work a little bit more. But rather than use something a bit coarser, which would end up with very deep scratches, I thought that was the best solution. So I'm afraid there's no easy shortcut to this job. You have to get your emery or wet and dry paper and just start rubbing. The key thing is to start to get some of the tarnish off and rough the surface up ever so slightly, so that the paint will key to it. If they were cheap and cheerful chrome hinges, as I say, I'd have just gone and bought some new ones. But these Parliament hinges are actually quite expensive. To go out and buy a new set in chrome was something like £40 for a pair. So talking about £80 overall, which is a lot of money just to freshen up the look of it. And there's actually nothing wrong with the hinges. That looks okay to me. There's a couple of spots here and there, but there's sufficient in my view, based on the first one I tried, that we should be okay with that, especially given the primer stage. Okay, I'll take these outside. I'll brush out the worst of the dust. Obviously you can see there's a lot of emery dust and brass surface filings, I guess. So I'll take these outside, clean this up, and then we'll move on to the cleaning step before priming with the grey primer. Okay, so I've brushed off any residual dust and particles that might have got trapped in some of the grooves. I'm now going to give the whole hinge a bit of a wipe with some white spirit, as this should give us a final cleaning stage before we can start priming them. Now you could use probably meths or some other cleaning solvent. I should probably have my blue gloves on, but hey ho. The aim is to make sure that there's no specks of dust left in that would going to ruin the painted surface. So final stage, I've got just a clean rag, and I'm just going to give it a complete wipe over so that any residual white spirit should get mopped up. Not that there should be a huge amount. So the aim is just to get a reasonable finish. Doesn't need to be perfect. Okay, I think we're there. So how do we paint them without having to hold them, or some other method that's going to end up with a mark on the paint? Well, I came up with this little arrangement. So just 4 panel pins and a piece of OSB or MDF, could be anything, that would allow me to do the hinge like that. So I can spray that side, and then obviously when that's dry I can turn it over and do that. So I've got 3 more hinges to do. So I've got that one, so I just need to make up something for another 2 hinges. So I've got this piece of batten that's been kicking around in the garage for quite some time. Just one pin there, and another one there. Set up. A rough idea of where the nail needs to go, so roughly about there. Should work. So that looks fine. Right away. Yeah. Should be the process. And out there. Okay, so you can come up with a different method. By all means, let's see what we have these hinges. There we go. I'll line that one up. I also got this lock faceplate, which I'm going to give it a go. It really only needs paint on the surface, so I'll just position that there. Just so it moving around the frame. I'll do fantastic. Right, we're ready to start with the primer. As with any aerosol paint, the key is getting it really well mixed. So shake it, shake it, shake it, and shake it again. Okay, it's pretty well shaken to death. Let's give it a little bit of a test spray. Make sure there's nothing clogging the nozzle. Okay, so the key with spray painting is thin coats. Thin coats. So easier with a shorter piece of wood. I'm going to leave this for quite a few hours to dry properly, and then we'll come back and do the other side. I guess one last note when you're spraying paints, I mean, I can smell the solvent in the air, so I'll be opening the garage door and putting my extractor fan on. Okay, so I've turned the hinges over, so we're going to paint the other side. Got them on the jig, chopped the end of that one down to make it a bit easier to turn around. Got the heater on because it's a bit chilly in the garage this morning. Given the can a good shake, so let's get going. So we'll do this one first. As I said yesterday, thin coats and nice even spray movements. And that's it, that's the priming finished. So we've now just got to let it all dry again, and we'll be able to get on with the chrome. See you in a few hours. Let's get some bling on. Can's been shaken very well. Okay, I think that'll do. We can leave those to dry, and then we've just got the other side to do when we'll be finished. All done. Just need to leave them to dry thoroughly now, and they can go back on the doors. Before I set to fitting the hinges to the doors, let's have a close-up look, see how chrome-like they actually are. So the first thing to say is I think the paint has covered very well. I mean, there's one or two specks, possibly from dust in my workshop, but generally I think the coverage is very good. The surface finish is very smooth. The obvious thing I'd say is they're not a polished chrome finish. A satin finish, I'd say. And some would say, well, actually, they just look like aluminium paint. And I probably wouldn't argue with you on that one. So how well do they compare with these bright chrome handles fresh out of the box? Well, clearly, there's no comparison. This is very much a bright polished finish. This is very much a satin finish. As I say, one could argue that it's actually more aluminium than chrome. For the cost of one can of aerosol paint and a little bit of primer, overall cost less than £15, I think we've ended up with something that's much fresher, brighter, and it'll certainly do the job for us. So why am I disappointed? Well, one, the chrome paint finish. It's very much more like an aluminium paint than a true chrome paint, in my opinion. Two, whilst I was refitting the doors, I had to handle the hinges quite a few times, and at the end of that process I found that they'd picked up very small smudge marks, even though my fingers were perfectly clean. Three, I also found the paint surface very susceptible to scratching. I don't know if you can see them perhaps on the left hand side there, but even though I took the utmost care, I still ended up with scratches in places. So here are my conclusions. I think I've answered my own questions. Multiple coats on the painting jig and it's much shinier. However, still getting traces of silver paint on your fingers when you handle it, and that's after a week. So some sort of clear lacquer on top is really needed, I think. Anyway, there you go.